Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I'm thrilled to welcome an award-winning columnist from the Jewish Journal. Her work has been featured in places such as the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times. She's the author of several books, including her memoir, Bylines and Blessings. Please help me welcome Judy Gruen. Judy, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
We have a lot to cover, but let's start by going back with you. I want to know, where did you grow up?
I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in a suburb called Van Nuys, a place that a lot of people like to make fun of. And for the past 25 years, my husband and I have been living in the city in the Pico Robertson area.
How was your family life like growing up with regard to Judaism? You observant at all or anything?
Well, sort of in a conservative way.
Okay.
My mother's parents were European immigrants, and my papa became a conservative rabbi.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We affiliated with a conservative shul,
Mhm.
and we often went for Friday night services, but we didn't keep Shabbat. We kept a form of kashrut in the house. My mother only bought kosher meat, but then we'd go out and have steak, so it was that kind of thing. And I liked being conservative. To me, it sounded very forward thinking, not too religious, but not giving away the store. And in my mid-20s, early 20s, actually, I met my husband, Jeff, and he was flirting with orthodoxy. And I thought, there's something wrong with everybody I meet, But he was just too good to give up over his exploration. And anyway, that started us
Yeah,
on.
I was going to touch upon that too, but yeah, I grew up much the same as you, a conservative household, and it's funny now. My daughters have embraced, much more observant than I ever was. So actually, all my kids have, because they have the trips to Israel. But let's go to your writing, because your writing, you've written many things. When did you first start, showing an interest in it? I guess showing interest in writing.
Probably when I was 7 or 8.
Hey.
It's really, I'm one of those people who it was very clear that this was my direction. And also, I was terrible at math and science. I mean, I froze up, and even by second or third grade, I needed help with math, which is really embarrassing. I just gravitated toward words. I had an inclination toward language, and that's just the way it was.
When did you first start thinking that you might have a talent in it, though?
Well, I was always encouraged in my writing. I think people saw that I had a certain capacity that was probably a little bit beyond my years. Of course, it was more than made up for by my total lack of ability in math. But I was very grateful that I had that, And starting in college, and I write about this in Bylines and Blessings. Oh, by the way, here's a copy of Bylines and Blessings.
There we go, of course. Yes.
There we go. There we go. Here's the plug. So in college, I write about this. It's the first story about how I decided, I'm already a writer. And I was at UCLA, and I got my first smack down thinking that I knew so much when I turned in my first story, and the editor totally redid it. But I was determined to learn from my early.
You didn't write throughout high school or anything like that? You didn't go dabble like a journal or creative writing or anything?
Not really. It's never been my thing to do a lot of journaling. And I know that, writing instructors always tell you to journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there's value to it. I just haven't been one of those people. The writing that I do, the personal essays, I guess that's my form of journaling.
I think we've all been there, because I remember my very first conference that I went to, writers conference. I gave a critique into an agent, and I'm feeling all proud of myself. And within the first couple of minutes, she's telling me how bad it is. and literally using those words pretty much. And I'm looking at the clock, and you sign up for a 15-minute critique, and I'm thinking, oh, I only have 13 more minutes of this.
Of demolition.
Right, exactly. So were you a big reader at all as a kid, or no?
Oh, always a reader, always a reader. Yes, and I still am. I'm at the library every week, and I'm looking for good things to read all the time. Often disappointed. I'm kind of a snob. I'm also a book reviewer, by the way. I write regular book reviews for the Jewish Journal.
Oh,
My book
nice.
reviews won an award from the LA Press Club in their most recent 2024 Southern California Journalism
Oh,
Award.
fantastic.
I'm very proud of that, because to write a good book review is not easy. You really need to truly read the book. And I'm not joking. I read a lot of book reviews, well, some, where I know the person has not really read it all the way
Hmm.
through. I can tell, because if I'm reviewing a book, there's a bunch of sticky notes all throughout the pages. So I was very proud of getting
Oh,
that
that's
award.
fantastic.
And I enjoy also giving a little boost to writers who have written worthy books, especially Jewish writers, and
Mhm.
especially now, given the
Right.
the environment that we live in.
Now, I'm just curious, if you were a big reader as a kid, so who were some of your favorites?
Well, I I read Irma Bombeck all the time. She wasn't writing for children, but I gravitated toward humor also. And my first three books, by the way, were humor books. And
I was
in
going
my
to ask
two
about those, right? Yeah.
In my two memoirs, Bylines and Blessings, and the one that came before, The Skeptic and the Rabbi,
Hmm.
there's a lot of humor. I've always gravitated toward that. I felt that humor was a lifeline.
Agree
There
with
was a
you.
lot of pain in my life. There is in everybody's life, but starting from a very early age, and there was just something life affirming and cathartic about humor. So, even as a young kid, I was reading Irma Bombeck. As a teenager, I discovered Herman Wouk, and I loved his work. And then, oh, what's her name? And one of the famous Irish novelists, probably Colleen something. That sounds nice and Irish. I love good fiction. I love literary fiction. I can't tolerate, quick and easy beach fiction. It's just too shallow. I'm always looking for that thing. Right now, I'm really into World War II historical fiction.
I love that as well. Yeah.
Reading a lot of that, and I read a lot of mysteries too.
So, first of all, don't most Jews deal with grief and pain through humor anyway?
I'm sorry, what?
Don't most Jews deal with like grief and suffering through humor also?
Yes, absolutely. Why do you
Yes.
think we have so many Jewish comedians through?
Right.
We've got to work through our angst. We've got so much of it,
Hmm.
but we
Very
come by
true.
we come by it honestly.
So, do you remember what, I mean, growing up, so we talked about your writing a little bit. So, what was the first thing that you remember really writing growing up?
The first thing I remember writing was some little story about running away from home, or I don't know. I mean, of course, it was a nothing. It was a total nothing, but I remember just the feeling of putting words on paper and loving that feeling. And never lost that loving feeling, as the old song goes. And in high school, I was able to take AP English, was the only AP I was qualified for, believe me.
Mhm.
And it's just always been there for me.
Anyone encourage? Because like I remember a high school teacher encouraging me about writing. She pulled me aside after class one day and said, you're really good with it. And so I remember, your parents or your family's always supposed to tell you you're good and to encourage you. But this was the first time that was like validated from someone else. So did you get any of that in school?
Yeah, I did, because I did well, so I would get really good feedback on my essays and tests, and I liked to talk to my English teachers. I just felt a rapport with them, and I loved the fact that they were teaching a subject that I loved, that was my favorite. And in college, I went to office hours with my favorite English professors. And in fact, one of them, who was a very young professor at the time when I took a couple of his classes at UCLA,
Hmm.
I'm still in touch with him now.
Oh, that's
I didn't
nice.
maintain touch over 40 years, but a few years ago, I discovered him that he was writing something in the Jewish space, which I didn't know. And I thought, I know him. And I looked him up, and we have rekindled an
That's
acquaintance,
nice.
which is really, really nice. And I sent him a copy of my book, and he has read some of my columns and gave me a lot of praise. And because he was my college professor, it meant so much to me that Professor Weber really likes my work.
That's one of the great things with social media is I've been able to look up teachers who meant a lot to me also, and befriend them now is at this different stage of life.
But I have
So
to tell you this, and this is also a story in Bylines and Blessings. When I was 20, I got a journalism internship in New York with the Jewish
mhm,
Press Service, which I'm
mhm,
sure does not exist anymore, at least not in that form. And I was thrilled because there was only one intern a summer. And I turned in my first reported story, and my editor, Ellie, sat me down. And I'm telling you, this page was bleeding red ink, so many circles, and it was all red, 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 red. And he saw the look of shock on my face, and he said something to me that has stayed with me forever. And he said, Judy, if you want to be a professional writer, you cannot be jealous of your own words. Those were his words. I never forgot it. I looked him up also when I was writing Bylines and Blessings.
mhm.
And I don't know why I looked him up, and I said, I want to quote you on this. Is that okay? And I wanted to just tell you that your words have
Meant a
stayed
lot.
with me over the decades, and how much they helped me really develop a professional attitude. Because, there's the stereotype, and maybe it's unfair, that many young people today cannot tolerate critique. They just can't
Mhm.
take it. They're fragile, they're snowflakes or whatever. I'm sure that that is not a fair thing to say about a lot of people. But look, if you want to grow up and learn to do something well, you have to be able to take it. And I was
Yeah,
determined to become as good as I could. And Ellie, my editor, told me, he said, it's amazing to me how often former students, or yeah, I
mhm.
guess I was a student, tell me things that they remember that I said. So that made him a really outstanding
That's
writer.
true. But I agree with you. To me, it's always better if something's not good, tell me that, because it's much better than spinning my wheels again and again, thinking that this is great and keep getting turned down for things. Tell me what's wrong, and this I can work it toward it.
Exactly, exactly. That's the way to become choose, what the subtitle of Bylines and Blessings is: overcoming obstacles, striving for excellence, and redefining success. I was always striving for excellence, and I still am 40 years into this, because you've never really arrived, in my opinion.
I
There's
agree. I
always
agree.
more where you can grow. And that's one of the things that I love about my work.
Oh yeah, I mean, you should always want to be learning also. So tell me about your writing journey. By the time you started taking this seriously, this is what I want. I want to do something with this. How long did it take you to get like published in your first book? And I guess.
Well, I didn't do a first book until I was close to 40. It hadn't really been a goal. I was in journalism. I did feature work.
Mhm.
I was writing for Jewish media as well as secular media. My big goals at the time were to break into the big consumer magazines, the Ladies' Home Journal, those kind of places. And I did,
How'd you
but
break in with that?
sorry.
How did you break in?
A lot of hard work. I was constantly reading about the industry.
Mhm.
Okay. I read about, you know, how to break in. I also, if you want to break into a certain media outlet, you have to read that media outlet. You have to know who are their readers, what do they want, what is their editorial angle. I did discover, as many other freelance writers discovered, that writing for some of these magazines was not all it was cracked up to be. They were difficult. The editors were often difficult to work with. I write about that too, the irony of the fact that the women's magazines in particular that definitely had a feminist bent, many of those editors displayed the worst stereotypes of women. And what do I mean by that? They kept changing their mind about what they wanted in a story after the story had been defined. So say you were getting $1 a word, I'm going back a long, long time. It sounded really good until they asked you for 7 revisions, and then so the bloom fell off that rose. And one day I was driving along and the term carpool tunnel syndrome just popped into my head. I don't know why, I don't know where. I remember where I was at a certain intersection in LA, and I thought, that's a book title. And I suddenly decided to write my first book, which is a humorous, an essay collection, stories about motherhood. And that was my first book. And then 2 other humor books followed. But all the time I was writing.
I was taking a look at the Carpool Tunnel Syndrome. Great title, by the way. I love that title. It looks like so much fun, everything of it. So you do both. You've written like more serious pieces. You've written a lot of humor. Is it tough to have that balance for you, like to try to incorporate both into things? Because I always think that humor is important to put into any work. But how hard is it for you to strike that balance? And do you have a preference?
It's a really good question. I infuse humor as often as possible, even in serious topics, because people appreciate it. And it whatever message you're trying to get across, it goes down easier with a little levity. Now, some topics are just too deadly serious. It's just would be completely inappropriate. It would be horrible to even try and make any light of something. I'll give you a perfect example. My next column for the Jewish Journal is about how I am in recovery mode from our holiday of Sukkot, which just passed, where we had in our modest-sized home 2 of our married kids and their families. So we went from a household of 2, my husband and me, to a household of 6 adults and 6 children, ages 8 and under, mostly way under. So my husband went into our room and I went in and he said, I'm not coming out there. Now I was thinking about making a joke about it being our safe room. But given what's going on in Israel, I thought, no, that's not the kind of little joke I would dare to make. So I found plenty of other ways to put in the humor about it. So it's a judgment. It's always a judgment. In terms of your question about the balance, I love the balance. I do a lot of feature work that has covered healthcare, psychology, what's going on in Israel, the war. I'm also a book editor and a book coach, and I have worked on several serious books, and I love that. The balance is important. It also expands my world, working with other writers, learning from them, learning what they're writing about. So I'm very, very fortunate to be able to have that balance.
Well, let's talk about the memoir, Bylines and Blessings. So I had a chance to go through it. Fantastic book, but you just said it yourself. It's a second memoir. You had the skeptic and the rabbi beforehand. So if the first was about your faith, and this was about your career more, I think. So this. So what prompted you to write a second memoir after the first?
Insanity. Oh, by the way, second plug. Here's
There
the
we go.
skeptic, the rabbi.
I commend you for having them both at your fingertips. Ready
Yes.
to go.
Well, after Skeptic and the Skeptic and the Rabbi was a protest memoir. Very clearly, it was a protest memoir. It was a memoir with an agenda. Why did I write it? I wrote it because starting from about 2012 and onward, there was this spate of anti-Orthodox memoirs that were coming out that were
It
to be
shows.
that were highly praised. Okay. And most of them were from writers that nobody ever heard of. And of course, they had the right to tell their story,
Mhm.
but I knew already, I was already very experienced with the world of journalism and publishing. I was very aware of what was going on. And for these writers to have been able to get their books published
Yep.
because of the anti-religious tone, it was infuriating for me. Choosing to become more Jewishly observant was the hardest decision of my life. It did not come easily. It was not a cakewalk. It is still not a cakewalk. But I know that for every sad story out there, there there are so many more good stories. And the fact that people like me and my husband and 100 people I know at least chose to made the decision to change their lives to become more Jewishly engaged, to raise Jewish children, has changed the face of modern Jewish life.
Mhm.
That's a story. That's a real story that was being ignored. So I wrote The Skeptic and the Rabbi, and it was really hard work, really, really, really hard work. And I was very proud of it. And it's still selling. It was published in 2017. And now that there is really a flowering of interest among many Jews of many ages, including young Jews, especially what they've endured on college campuses.
Right.
So I'm really hoping that people will discover both of the memoirs because they are Jewishly affirming, they're funny, but they're substantive. So I had no notion of writing any other memoir. Who needs another memoir from me, right? Who am I? But I realized that I hadn't written stories about my career and its evolution. And there were a lot of life lesson stories. There were a lot of, I think, funny stories. There was the story of how, with absolutely zero credentials, I managed to get the interview with Clarence
I
Clemons.
was going to ask you about that one. We'll get to that one afterwards.
And
We'll talk about that.
so I just started blogging these stories. I just started blogging them for fun. And then I thought, uh-oh, these are good. Where am I going with this? And oh, no, 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 no. Just don't even think that way because a book is a lot of work. It's just a lot of work. But I couldn't help myself, and I am a writer. So when I had about 6 or 7 of the blogs, which was already about 14,000 words, which is not insignificant,
Mhm.
I found a developmental editor. I also do developmental editing. That means you're looking at something kind of from a macro writing standpoint. You're not dissecting sentences. You're looking at, is there meat on the bones, I said, do I have something here? And of course, I wanted him to, part of me wanted him to say no, and part of me wanted him to say yes. And he said yes. So I worked with him for over a year, and he really helped me show me where and where I needed to puff out some stories, not puff out, but fill out some stories. And I thought, oh, what the heck, let's go for it again. And so that's how I have Bylines and Blessings. And to my surprise, because I thought that Skeptic and the Rabbi, I know that it's a very good book and it got a lot of wonderful reviews, and it has changed some people's lives. I only know that because they told me. And I didn't think that Bylines and Blessings was necessarily better than they're different.
Different, very different.
I have been told that by some people that they like Bylines and Blessings better. That I became
Well, they're
more.
different focuses entirely.
It is a different focus. It's certainly less religiously based, although it definitely talks about Jewish values, and how I had a conflict many times in my career in trying to integrate myself into the broader non-Jewish secular world of writers, and
Mhm.
how unfriendly that began to feel. But overall, what people are telling me is that there's more of a personal sense of who I am, more revealing here. So I'm glad. If I could do better this time than last time, I'm happy.
Well, I'm totally with you. I know of all the shows that you mentioned, because the books, and then some became TV shows and series about, you know, it was to me an anti-Jewish thing. You mentioned that it was like against religion that you got the book, but it's not just religion in general. It's one specific religion that they wanted to go, show the darker side, or I guess the bad side of it. So
Right.
those books, those series, like always got me angry when I saw them as well. So yeah, I do commend you for that. But let's talk about your religion, your faith. You just mentioned it. So you didn't grow up Orthodox, and we talked about that. And this is fascinating to me because I know people didn't grow up religious who are now Chabad, or like my own kids who grew up very Jewish minded. We're in a very Jewish minded house, but not religious like that, and now they're very observant. So
Uh-huh.
what led to that? Besides your husband, what led to that? Was it a difficult you know decision to make, that saying I'm going to now follow this much stronger than I have before?
Right. So that is the story I tell in full in The Skeptic and the
Right.
Rabbi. But to boil it down, I had never heard anything from an Orthodox teacher. In fact, my dear grandparents, the ones who were religious,
Mhm.
they were so serious and so somber. And so psychologically, I thought, gosh, they're so serious and they're only conservative. I can't imagine how deadly serious it would be if you were
Orthodox.
Orthodox.
Right.
And I considered myself a feminist, and I assumed, it was going to be totally anti-feminist and
Mhm.
all of this. And Jeff and I dated, I'm not kidding, for close to 1 year before I even agreed to go with him to one class. I mean, I was a tough nut. Um, and when I did, I started having to face the fact that I myself was prejudiced, that I really didn't know anywhere near as much as I thought I did. In fact, I realized that I knew almost nothing despite years of Hebrew school. I didn't know. So I was about to go off to graduate school. I left LA to go to Chicago for my master's program in journalism at Northwestern. And Jeff, I knew, was on his road to continuing to learn from Torah teachers. And it was really wrenching. It was really wrenching because I had to be willing to kind of re-identify or face my fears and face my stereotypes.
Mhm.
I feared losing my friends who were like me, secular, over time. And that unfortunately did happen.
Mhm.
Although I gained amazing, beautiful friendships with people who, like me, also grew up like me and realized, there is a deeper way to live. And when I started to realize that the Torah was true, that God was real, I thought, there really are consequences for these decisions that I make. How am I going to live if I'm going to live a secular life, marry a Jewish guy, we'll have Jewish kids, but following the trend lines, I knew that maybe my kids would probably not marry Jewish. And I thought, I just have to be willing to explore. So that's how it started. And I started to be willing to explore. And what I learned was just kind of mind blowing. That doesn't mean it was easy. It doesn't mean that it isn't easy to live up to the standards, but I try.
No, it's very tough when you have different levels of faith, I guess, among friends, because some, and they can go out Friday nights or Saturdays during the day, and it's very tough. I totally get that aspect of it too, with that. So you're still in journalism now, so how do you see the field in relation, I guess, to Jewish matters? Because it seems like there's such a huge bias in talking about against Jews,
Oh,
especially against Israel. what do you make of the field right now? Because I'm an author as well. I see it in publishing all the time. There too, there's such an anti-Semitic, stain over the
Mhm.
industry. What do you see right now with that?
So today, in the New York Times, you may have already seen it. There is an op-ed by Deborah Harris, who is a longtime, well-known literary agent based in Israel. She's
Yeah.
had an agency for over 30 years, and she's represented writers from many countries. She's not a nobody. And she was writing about this open letter, which I'm sure you're also aware of, that has 5,000 signatories calling for a total boycott of anything Jewish. And this is among writers, and it was spearheaded by this Irish writer, Sally Rooney.
Yes.
And so there is now a counter open letter that,
I signed that today. That's
yeah, I signed that today too. So there is that going on. There is the unbelievable bias, as you say, even among newspapers where you wouldn't necessarily expect it, such as the Wall Street Journal, which people say, "Oh, that's so conservative." Well, the editorials are conservative, but the news reporting is very biased, very biased. I remember a headline from a
well,
few
you
months.
mentioned the New York Times, which is one of the worst offenders.
Oh, it is the worst. So
Yeah.
I don't know how Deborah Harris got her op-ed in there,
Right.
but I'm
I was wondering that
glad
too.
she did.
Okay,
Glad she
sorry
did.
to interrupt you.
But there was their headlines are just there was one a few months ago that was the thrust of it was, Netanyahu is blocking latest hostage deal. Huh? I mean, anything that they can skew against
Right.
Israel, and this is the Wall Street Journal. So forget about the Washington Post and the LA Times. I've had
Garbage.
to give up, they have no credibility, and that's why the whole world of journalism is becoming increasingly siloed. So there are more and more people who are just getting their news elsewhere. For example, Barry Weiss is the Free Press
Yes.
online, which I strongly urge anyone watching this, go on to Substack, the Free Press. It is incredible. And they have reporters, writers, high-level people, many of whose bylines you will recognize from other high-level places that are doing real reporting and that are there. And you know who Barry Weiss is, and she
Yeah,
famously.
she's a fascinating subject to me always. I totally respect. I love all the things about it, but just to see the changes she's made in her career and personal, views, fascinating to me. Just to see like the awakening of, hey, this is how things are.
Right, right. So it's a sad state of affairs in terms of journalism, and I think that's one reason why our whole society is so at odds with each other. If you go on Fox News and then you go on CNN,
Mm-hmm.
you look at how they're covering the exact same
Right.
thing, you th you think you're in different universes.
But again, like we talk about the time, a lot of the Times, Washington Post, CNN, anything to go against Israel and the Jews, they will find it, and
They will
and, and
find it.
all those
They will
outlets.
find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I was looking at the stuff in the book and also your career. One of the fascinating things that I read that in your book, which I love, I want to hear more about that, is that you visited the Soviet Union when you were younger. I have to hear what that experience was like, especially in regard to Jews. What did you see?
Well, okay, it was over 40 years ago. I had just graduated college.
The Soviet Union's been gone for a while, so I want to. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah. So my grandmother, my mother's mother, immigrated to the United States from Russia.
mhm.
When she immigrated, it was Russia. And she was only 16 and she came over by herself. And she left behind her mother and her sister. Her father had already come to San Francisco. And she lost track of her sister during once the communists took over. when, they were just cutting things off. So for years and years and years, my Nana, and now our grandkids call me Nana. I chose
Like
that.
my grandmother. That's
Yeah. She was trying desperately to find out what happened to her sister because they had lost contact for decades. Finally, through an intermediary, she found her sister Rosa again. They started corresponding. They had to do that through an intermediary. And when my grandmother was already 69 or 70, she was already getting sick. She didn't live very long after that. She went back to the Soviet Union, to see her sister Rosa for the first time in 50 years.
Oh.
She was there for a week, and they were just sitting on the couch together and crying and talking and hugging. And as my Nana knew she was not going to live much longer, she made us all promise that we would go back and see Rosa again. So my mother and her sister and their father, my papa, they went back shortly after. And then my mother and sister wanted to go back again. My mother and her sister, my Aunt Eleanor. And my grandfather did not want to go back again, but he knew how much I wanted to. So in 1982, we went back, and it was chilling. When we got off the plane, without anybody asking us our names, somebody came up to us. They knew who we were.
Wow.
Then they separated us. They separated my mother and me from my Aunt Eleanor. Come with me. And I mean, like out of a movie, a scary movie.
Wow.
They went when we were not in our hotel room. They came in and messed things up. There were microphones hanging from the ceiling. I mean, they made no effort to hide any
Oh my
of
gosh.
this. So, and then there was one day I was on the bus with my great Aunt Rosa, and I asked something about something Jewish. It was a mistake. And she went like this, and she said, in der Heim, meaning in the house. And I realized, you idiot, you're not in LA, you're not in Brooklyn.
Right.
But it was scary.
Yeah. Sounds terrifying. My gosh. So, I'm jumping around a little bit here because there's so many fascinating things I saw in your book, and you mentioned it already. So the interview that I have to ask you about, especially as someone who is such a big Springsteen fan, I've seen him several times in concert. So you interviewed Clarence Clemons, the late Clarence Clemons. I've done many celebrity interviews, and I'm so jealous of that one because I'm really so there too. So how did that come about? Really, and what was the experience like?
So yeah, I tell the story also. It's worth it to get the book just for this story alone.
Yes.
Truly, despite all the serious things I'm talking about here, it was just so fun. So I was trying to heal from a broken heart from a guy who ghosted me, and he had kind of introduced me to Springsteen's music, and of course I fell in love with it right away. And he also took me to a concert by Clarence Clemons, who had his own band for a while called Red Bank Rockers. And so this guy took me to see Clarence at a club in Hollywood. I was over the moon. I was just wildly ecstatic. It was just so exciting. I loved it. So after he dumped me, I found out that Clarence was coming back into town. He had a new album. And I thought, I don't know, it was kind of an insanity. I thought, I want to get an interview with him. Now, I didn't know a tenor sax from a this sax or anything. I had no credibility. I had no knowledge of the music industry. And so I tell the story about how I take the, not Writer's Digest, but there was a big compendium that showing all these kinds of magazines and publishers. And I'm looking, who might take me, 22 years old, with zero track record of writing about anything in the music industry, and give me an assignment? Well, I finally found a Black Man's Magazine, kind of a naughty one. And I said, would you like to get an interview with Clarence Clemons? Meanwhile, I had called CBS and they said, well, who are you writing for? I said, well, I'm not sure yet. But anyway, somehow I made this work. And I remember I was going to interview him, and CBS said, okay, fine, you're doing it for this magazine called Players.
Hmm.
And they didn't mean gin rummy, okay? So it was going to be at the CBS studios, fine. Then the day before they call in and say, change of plans, it's going to be in his hotel room. And I thought, this doesn't sound right. Is this right? Is this normal? And my mother said, you're not going to his hotel room. She saw, like he was this
Right.
big guy. I said, oh, Mom, reporters do this all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, do they? I have no idea. And I still can remember walking down the hall in the hotel toward his room. I'm shaking. I'm thinking like, what am I doing? I mean, I had my questions ready, but is my tape recorder going to work and all of this? But it was really sweet. He was like a big giant teddy bear. And I said, do you mind if I just test the tape recorder? He said, sure, go ahead. And it was really fine. And then when the magazine was published, I was afraid to go find it because you had to go behind the curtain. You had to go behind that awful curtain. And so, like I could barely touch the thing. But anyway, I had to cover over a certain cartoon on one of the pages, but but I sent a copy of it to the ex and I just said, FYI.
Exactly. Got the
And I
best
just felt
revenge.
so much better. So it
Right.
was like 10 therapy sessions to do that.
Okay. Did you hear back or no?
Oh, no.
Okay.
He probably thought, this girl is so nuts. I am so glad that I dropped her. Although it's
And
better than slashing his tires, right?
no, but you got the best revenge, and I'm sure it stung, so that's good. So,
Yeah.
while reading your memoir, so I was just wondering, you're observant, you're very Jewish minded. So, are there any stories that you missed out on for one reason or another, either because it conflicted with your Judaism or maybe beliefs wise, that through the years,
I'm not sure what you mean by missing out
like
on.
like you couldn't cover it because it was like on a spot on a holiday or something, or
Oh,
something along that your belief system did not let you go cover something.
yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of conferences most conferences, professional conferences are over the weekend.
Hmm.
So to go, and I've gone to a few writers' conferences, but you have to make a lot of accommodations and special planning to go over Shabbat. And over the years, I guess the older and more experienced I get, the less value I see in going to some of these. In terms of the networking, it's not where my priorities are. My priorities over the past several years, and especially over the last year, has been more and more to double down or triple down on serving the Jewish community, because we are in such a time of need, a
Yeah,
time of need of being strengthened and encouraged. And it's one reason why I continue to write light pieces for the Jewish Journal, not all of them, but there's so much about, and understandably so, rightly so, about Israel and anti-Semitism, but
fine.
people can't just absorb that all day long. So I write light things about slice of life things, and people really like it. And they tell me, thank you, keep doing this.
That's good.
It's important to have a little balance and a little levity because we do still have our lives to live, and we need a little bit of lightness.
It sounds like what I was about to ask you too. It sounds like yes, that how did October 7th like change you first? Because I know I'm changed forever in many ways because of it. How did it change you? How did it hit you?
Our eldest son, who he's 35,
Mhm.
and he said to my husband the next day, he said, Dad, I don't think you realize this is the biggest thing that has happened in my lifetime. And he was a kid during 9/11. but I think it's true. I think it's true because it has, I think there's been a demarcation in the world showing us that the anti-Semitism that we thought was maybe kind of sort of kept under a little bit of a lid with certain exceptions, how it exploded from places that we didn't expect, but it made us realize how much toxic hatred against us and against Israel has already been going on, and
Right.
people are not paying attention, such as on the college campuses. In terms of how it affected me, again, it just made me more committed to doing what I know how to do to
Mhm.
serve the Jewish community. I tried to, I have, joined prayer groups. I signed up to do a daily study, which I have to admit I have fallen off of over the last few months, but I'm planning to get back on and catch up. And doing these spiritual things. So it's not enough to do the practical things, which I can do through my writing, but I think that spiritually, anything that we do is really important, including trying to make peace with other people in our lives where maybe we're at odds with them.
Right.
I think that's what the Almighty wants from us. I think it's no coincidence that this happened, this horrible, horrible thing happened after a season of terrible, terrible infighting in Israel itself.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I would couple of points, that you just talked about. I mean, it's eye-opening, and you brought up before about the letter from people in our own industry, that are boycotting Jews or boycotting Israel, and you see, I've people that you've been friends with, people that you've worked alongside. Oh, this is how you really feel, and it's just eye-opening, and it's disgusting, and it's just you feel closed in, but there are, and that's one of the good things is that you find out you embrace other Jews, you embrace and people that I could disagree with on so many different things. I don't care about those things as much right now. I don't. I care that we are all one. We are all Jews, and we have to stand together to fight. And I agree with you on that. But it is a different time. It is definitely a different perspective on a lot of things right now. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what are you working on next? You have all these great books. You wrote a journal. What are you working on next?
Right now, I'm just working on my columns. I also have a Substack under my name. Check
Okay.
it out. And I do book editing and I coach writers. So I have a couple of book clients right now, and I welcome the opportunity to hear from people who may have a book in them and would like some guidance on how to go about it. I have no notion of doing another book right now. Maybe that'll change, maybe it won't. I'm starting to well, there are several book groups, book clubs that are starting to read my book. And so I've
That's
got
good.
more appointments coming up to be with those groups, either in person or on Zoom. So that's what I'm working on.
You have all these things going on. Where can people find you? How can they find you on social media to get all these things?
Okay, so on my website, which is judygruen.com, there are links to social media and the Substack. You can find me on the Substack. And on my website, there are also links to my columns from the Jewish Journal.
You
There's
have very
ways,
good. Yeah, your website's very good and a lot of good
yeah,
articles.
yeah.
So, yeah.
So there's lots of ways to find me, and love to hear from your listeners, your viewers. And I hope that they check out Bylines and Blessings because it's really it's a fun read, but it's
Mhm.
also an important read. I think now it has a resonance that I would never have asked for in terms of it being a book that very much underscores my conscious decision over the years through my my quest for ambition. You know, I had such a thirst to be very ambitious and, quote, successful, and how I realized over time that I needed to redefine success in a way that meant that I have impact. So the impact maybe is not as big as it might have been had I not chosen to focus on my Jewish values, but it was absolutely the right decision, and I stand by it. And I think that's a message that is very reassuring to other Jewish people now. Stand by your convictions. You will not go wrong, and ultimately you will come out ahead.
Judy, I want to thank you again for coming on. Definitely a pleasure talking to you. I enjoyed the book. Book, once again, is Bylines and Blessings. Make sure you go get it. And again, really thank you.
Thank you.
This has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. And again, very special thanks to Judy Gruen. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.